Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to discuss the innocence or guiltiness of Mary Surratt. Mary Surratt was a victim of the Lincoln assassination. Before I get into it, I'm going to let you know that the reason why I chose to talk about her is she was not guilty. And I want to tell you my own version of what I believe to be the story of Mary Surratt. So Mary Surratt was not guilty. If anybody's watched The Conspirator that came out in 2011, I actually went and saw it opening night. But if anybody wants to see The Conspirator that came out in 2011, you check it out on demand or on Netflix. It's a good movie. But it focuses on the trial of Mary Surratt. Mary Surratt owned a boarding house on 10th Street over in Washington, D.C. And what had happened was, during the American Civil War, she ran the boarding house because she lived in Surrattsville, Maryland. And she was married to a man by the name of John Surratt, who was a innkeeper and a bar owner, and he was a very abusive man. Well, he drank himself to death out, I want to say, in 1860. Now, when he died in 1860, his wife, Mary Surratt, took her two kids, Anna Surratt and John Surratt Jr., and took them to live with her in Washington, D.C. While she was there, she bought herself a boarding house. Or just a regular little townhouse, whatever you want to call it. But she turned it into a boarding house. And what she did there was, for the course of 4 years, she ran a boarding house. Basically, a boarding house is, basically like a hotel. It's sort of like America's first bed and breakfast, but you board there and you live there. So I guess you could say it's America's first apartment. While she lived there, during the war, an actor by the name of John Wilkes Booth, he was 26 years old, a 26-year-old man by the name of John Wilkes Booth. Obviously, everybody knows who John Wilkes Booth is. Yep, he's the man that assassinated our 16th president because he was a Southern sympathizer. He was at Lincoln's second inaugural address. You learned that Lincoln was assassinated for winning the Civil War. He was not assassinated in any condition about that at all. He was assassinated because he gave African Americans the right to vote. He is a martyr for African American voting rights. And Booth was there, and he said, I could have shot him. During that time, he came up with a wonderful idea. I'm going to kidnap him. So he got a group of conspirators together because he met John Surratt Jr., Mary Surratt's son. John Surratt and Mary Surratt's son, who was very capable of the Confederate cause. John Surratt knew Dr. Samuel Mudd. Dr. Samuel Mudd was a physician in Maryland, and he introduced John Wilkes Booth to George Surratt, Lewis Payne, David Harold, Edmund Spangler, Samuel Arnold, and Michael O'Loughlin. And Louis Whiteman's another one. It was in the boarding house around 1864 that they started planning a kidnapping plot. And they planned to kidnap him in exchange for Confederate prisoners. When he decided he changed his plans. He was going to go on to visit wounded soldiers at a place called Campbell Hospital on March 17th of 1865, I believe. When he chose to make a speech at the National, it changed because it became unworkable. He thought, well, the war is going to end anytime soon, but he's going to pay for becoming a martyr and giving free African Americans the right to vote, which was his whole standard of why he assassinated the president. It was other reasons for that. But what had happened was they went back to the boarding house, planned what they were going to do, and they created it for the night of April 14th, 1865. He was supposed to go see Aladdin and his wonderful lamp at Grosvenor's Theater. Well, earlier that morning on April 14th, the First Lady, Mary Todd Lincoln, wrote in the newspaper, "I got tickets for Our American Cousin, and we're going to go to Ford's Theater to go see Our American Cousin." He learns about the plot that day. So, he changes his plans. And they meet back at the Suratt boarding house. Again, Mary Surratt let them in. Obviously, most of everything was done behind closed doors, which is what I believe happened. She, as a woman back in those days, wasn't allowed to see what was going on. So, what I believe is the assassination was being planned behind closed doors, and her son was involved. I think she got wind of it and knew a little bit of stuff that was going on, but I don't think she learned the full story. So she let them do what they needed to do, and that was it. So they left the Surratt boarding house. Her son, John Surratt, already left on the run. Louis Payne went to Lafayette Square to go after the Secretary of State, William Seward. George and Surratt went to the Kirkwood House Hotel to go after the Vice President. And then what had happened with, and then someone was going to go after Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant was supposed to actually go with the Lincolns to the theater, but Mary Surratt, from what I was told, Mary Todd Lincoln and Julia Dent Grant did not get along. They went and saw their kids over in New York. So that plan was botched. So their last minute guests, Henry Rathbone and Clara Harris, came with them. They went to a party. Congress was coming over. They were having a party. They had won the war. They were telling stories, and he says, "I wish I could stay, but I gotta go." Play started at 8:30. They got there, I want to say around maybe 9 o'clock. Booth went there around 9:15. Went over to the bar across the way, right next door actually, and drank a few drinks. He came back at around, I want to say, 10 o'clock. He left the bar at around 10 o'clock. And he walked into the back alley and told Edmund Spangler to watch the horse. Edmund Spangler didn't have time to. Edmund Spangler worked as a set changer at the theater. And he didn't have time, so he gave the horse the peanuts. He walked over, walked beneath the stage while Laura Keaton was doing her thing. Booth was was caught by a few friends on the second balcony of Ford's Theater. He had walked past a few friends, opened up, went to the yellow door that goes up to the second pier, like the pier where the boxes are, gave a card to Lincoln's valet, Charles Forbes. Where this card comes from, we have no idea. Walked up to box number 8 and took out this pistol. Small gun. It's a small .42 caliber Derringer, made in Philadelphia. He took the gun and a Bowie knife, took the pistol like this, stood up, and cocked it back, and had his knife ready, and was listening to Laura Keaton. Laura Keaton was on stage, and as Harry Hawk is saying a few lines, one of the few lines was, "I am offering your daughter everything she wants. I am wrapping my emotions all over you like applesauce over roasted pork. Mr. Trenchard, I believe you are addressing my daughter and in my presence. I most certainly am. I am giving her everything she wants, with my heart and soul, just the way she likes it, with nothing in them." And they get in an argument, as the play is supposed to be. And he says, "Well, I believe you don't know the good manners of good society, which you have fallen guilty." Harry Hawk comes up and says, his character, the line he says is, "Don't know the good things of good society, eh? Well, I guess I know how to turn you inside out, you so-called idolizing old man trap," and he shoots him. This gun goes off. He drops the gun, goes after Henry Rathbone, stabs him, jumps, breaking the fibula in his left leg, and yells, "Sic Semper Tyrannis," and runs out the door. He makes his way to the Navy Yard Bridge, goes over the Navy Yard Bridge after arguing with a soldier who was suspicious, finds his way to Dr. Mudd's house. Well, before they go to Dr. Mudd's house, they go to Mary Surratt's tavern, get 2 guns, 2 Spencer carbines. They find Dr. Mudd at around 4 a.m. He fixes his leg. He finds out about the situation the next day. They capture him along with Louis Payne, Samuel Arnold, Michael O'Loughlin, Edmund Spangler, George Anserat, you know the rest. He's at the George Garrett farm. John Wilkes Booth goes to the George Garrett farm on April 26th. Is shot dead at the George Garrett farm. A trial begins about a month after Booth's shooting. And it's all about Mary Surratt. Mary Surratt was targeted because the plan to go after Lincoln was plotted in her boarding house. It was planned over a good many months. Plus, she was from Maryland, which was a slave state and a border state. Her son was involved, clearly. She at all was not involved. They hanged her because they couldn't get to John Surratt. So anyway, the trial was 2 months in the making. both 4 people got sentences and 4 people were put to death. People who got life sentences and were put in Florida's prison on the Gulf Coast were Samuel Arnold, Michael O'Loughlin, Edmund Spangler, and Dr. Samuel Mudd. The ones who were in charge of the killing of Abraham Lincoln were David Harold, put to death, Louis Payne, put to death, and George Surratt, put to death, along with Mary Surratt, who, again, it was not guilty. She was guilty because they found evidence that Booth knew. She had evidence, that they had found evidence of the fact that Booth was in her boarding house. So they thought because her son had invited them into the house, planned what they were going to plan, she right out knew what her son was up to. The way I look at it, her son is not involved in the killing. I mean, her son is. She is not. Her son helped Booth escape. Her son gave Booth advice, where to find weapons, how to get the weapons, and mostly gave him the initiative that he needed. He escaped because they couldn't find him. They couldn't find him. His mother got in trouble for it. So, this gun shot Lincoln. On Good Friday, 1865. He died on the early morning of April 15th at 7:22. On July 7th, they hanged the conspirators. Mary Surratt was the first woman ever to be hanged by the federal government. And it was a death that didn't need to be done. She is not guilty in any capacity, in any way. I believe she's guilty for allowing them to plan things in her house, and I believe she's guilty because she didn't say anything to the authorities. But do I think she would have allowed Booth into her boarding house if she knew he was going after the commander-in-chief of the country? I don't believe so. I believe she was their second option because they couldn't find her son, and she wasn't given whereabouts of her son. But either way, I believe she's completely innocent, because after she was hanged on July 7th, guess who shows up? John Surratt. And for 16 months, they hold him in the same cell as Mary Surratt. They could not find a good system or good conviction for John Surratt's case. He was set free by a hung jury. But because of Mary Surratt's innocence and ignorance of the federal government killing her anyway, it was decided that people will be convicted if they committed a crime in times of war and peace. And she thus happening to be the most, not only was the most greatest crime in American history committed, but the greatest trial of the century taking place, and the execution of the first American woman to be executed by the federal government, Mary E. Surratt. She is not guilty. So I wanted to tell you that since I'm on YouTube for a while now, tell you what I'm interested in, and I wanted to give you my own theories on Mary Surratt, whether she's guilty or not. I believe she's not. Other people will say she is. Her son most often is guilty. So, with that being said, with that being said, I just want to say, if you're interested in seeing The Conspirator, please Netflix it, DVR it, wherever you find it on demand. It's a good movie. And I'll see you in the next video. Now that we're getting into May, well, now that we're getting into June, Memorial Day is coming up. So from Memorial Day on maybe about mid-July, I'm going to be talking about historical things. So I will talk to you in the next video coming up. And thanks for listening in on my story. Talk to you soon. Bye.